Roob, we're almost there. We're like 2 weeks and 2 days from the NFL draft.
How about that? Yeah, I'm thinking it's 3 weeks, but it's really just a couple days over 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from Thursday is the big day. But I love it all. So it's gonna be a fun few days. It's always, to me, the draft is the kind of fulcrum that ends last year and begins next year, because the new team, they added free agents, but the new team will really come together draft weekend.
Yeah, it's always fun when that happens. We're excited for the draft, but the lead up to the draft is always fun too. So we'll get into some of that today. We're going to talk about the biggest draft needs for the Eagles heading into 2023. We'll discuss Jalen Carter. Is it worth it? What are the factors that determine whether or not it's worth it to draft him or even trading up to draft him? And then at the end, we're going to do something new for this pod, and we're going to continue it throughout the next few pods up until the draft. We're going to look at their best picks from around and their worst picks from around under Howie Roseman. We'll start it off with the 7th round today. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast. He's Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. Reuben, before we get into it, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, Dave. I appreciate your concern. Beautiful. It's beautiful out. It's going to be a real hot at the end of the week, like close to 90. Looking forward to it. I like the hot weather.
Yeah, I do too. I try to not complain about the hot weather because I feel like you can only complain in one extreme, and I use all my complaining when it's cold.
Yeah, I never complain about the weather because I like extremes. I like weather extremes. I don't mind it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I do. You'll never hear me complain about the weather. It's boring. People complain about the weather. Oh, it's too hot. Oh, it's too cold. Just deal with it.
Okay.
When the rain comes, they run and hide their head. Like the Beatles song.
No.
You haven't heard of? Have you heard of the Beatles? I know you're not.
Who are they?
Bands
like
and
the life form?
might be my favorite Beatles song, actually. Great harmonies, great playing. Anyway.
Okay. I get that. Yeah, I like this time of year. I did a bunch of yard work this weekend. At my house, my parents' house, did some landscaping, planted some plants. Tried to do all that before it gets too hot. Because once it gets too hot, then it's like you're out there just sweating too much, and then it gets.
Yeah, but you love it when it's training camp. Like when it's 100 at training camp, you like it.
Well, it's supposed to feel like that.
Right, I guess so. Yeah.
At training camp, that's what I look at. It's like training camp should be hot. It should be just a little miserable for everybody.
It's miserable for me because, well, never mind. I have to listen to you and Elliot chart plays. So
I don't chart plays.
You come pretty close. Anyway,
I do love training camp. Training camp is my favorite time of the NFL season.
You should see Dave the last day of training camp. He's so sad. He's just like, it's really kind of pathetic. But
thanks.
You get really emotional the last day of camp.
Oh, I don't get to watch practice anymore.
I know that is the problem. It's the only time we can watch practice.
Yeah. All right. I figured we would rank the Eagles' needs, and hopefully you did this the same way I did or similar to it. But their top needs going into the draft, I ranked out 5 of them. So some of them don't make the cut, obviously. You want to go from 5 to 1?
Yeah.
And we'll see where we agree, where we disagree. What'd you have at number 5?
I had edge at number 5.
Okay. We weren't far off there. I had it at 4.
Yeah, and just thinking, they have some good players there, but obviously BG at this point in his career isn't going to play much longer. It's hard to count on him for 11 more sacks, for double-digit sacks again, although nothing he does would ever surprise me. Excuse me. Sweat has gotten a little bit better each year. He was really good last year. He's got 2 more years, and you hope that they would re-sign him. But Barnett, we don't really know what to expect from him. I think anything you get from Barnett is icing on the cake. And Reddick, it's a really good bunch, but I really think there's room for a young edge rusher at some point in the near future.
Yeah, and with Barnett, I don't even know if they're counting on him being here this year. I could see them letting him heal up completely from the ACL, and if they don't think it's going to make sense, and they can release him after June 1st, and kind of wipe their hands and move on. Uh, the nice thing about a need at one of the line positions on defense is that those guys are going to play. Like it's not an immediate need. Like they have their starters and they even have BG as the third guy. But whoever, if they draft someone, even if they draft someone really high or in the mid rounds, like that guy's going to play quite a bit as a rookie. And obviously that's not the case at a lot of other positions.
No, that's true with that rotation. And, we didn't really see a whole lot from Patrick Johnson, which, look, he was a late round pick. So anything you get out of him is a bonus. But they don't really have that young guy to kind of, groom for the next generation of edge rushing.
Yeah, they've drafted a few edge guys like late, Teron Jackson, Patrick Johnson, Kyron Johnson, all 6th or 7th round picks. You'd like to see, all right, maybe it's time to use a high pick on an edge player.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had that at 5. I had that at 4. I had offensive line. I kind of cheated and said offensive line at 5 because I think it makes sense to draft someone that has a little flexibility. Now, I don't know if that's going to be in the first round. I know there are some there's a thought that they could use a pick on a first rounder, and I wouldn't rule that out given their history. But I think a player who has some versatility checks some boxes because you could have a guy who's a tackle, but he has some guard flexibility, who can maybe start if you need him to, but it can also back up multiple spots in the line, which is really important. And you look at what they have on the offensive line, their 5 starters are really good, but they've essentially lost their 2 best backups because Sam Alu leaves, which means Cam Jurgens, you lose him as a backup because he's a starter, and then you lose Andre Dillard. So time to replenish there a little bit. Jack Driscoll is a solid backup, but after that, you're talking about like Sua Opeta and Brett Toth. You probably want a little bit more there.
Yeah, they've really lost that great depth that they had, which is just a sign of how good their backups were, I guess. Yeah, I think that's certainly, especially outside. I mean, they don't really they don't have a ton of at least guys like Driscoll and Sua have played. They've played decent football, but again, with Howie, you're never surprised if he goes O-line early.
Yeah, and like they've shown that they'll do this. Like they drafted Lane to replace JP, and it never happened, but they did it far in advance. And now you look at Lane's 33, Kelsey's 35. These guys aren't going to be here forever, and it's typically the way the Eagles do it is they try to get ahead of this stuff. And like they didn't need Landon Dickerson when they drafted him,
right?
Immediately, they thought they had Brandon Brooks at right guard, and it's crazy how things change, and then you just have this player, you plug and play him. So a lot of examples of them willing to draft linemen, offensive linemen, before they really need them. And that's a little tougher to do than defensive line because you might, if everything goes well, you probably don't play these guys a ton early.
Yeah, no rotations on that side of the ball. And I think Howie is really kind of, you look at his recent O-line draft picks. I mean, he obviously had a spectacular miss in 2011, but I mean, Dickerson's going to be an all-pro. I mean, he's really, really good, and you feel pretty good about Jurgens. I mean, we haven't seen him play yet, but I think they nailed that pick too. So you feel better now with Howie's O-line drafting, I think, than maybe a while ago.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, where do you think they land on the Dillard pick now that it's done? He's gone.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's so hard to tell because, I mean, he obviously wasn't ready mentally, I think, more than physically the first time around. And then there were injuries, and then Mulata emerged. I think he's a good player. Can't say it was a successful pick because, you take a guy in the first round and he never becomes a full-time starter for you. That's not ideal, but I do think he's a good player, and I think we'll see that.
Yeah, certainly not a successful pick, though.
Yeah, I agree.
They didn't draft them for Tennessee to play.
No, no, they did not.
But I wonder also if it changes any like their philosophy at all, because they drafted a guy that like he was a player that they didn't do a ton on because they didn't think he'd be in the range, and then he's in the range and they kind of panic and they move up to get him. And the knocks on him about his toughness, both like physical and mental, showed. Like those were his weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Howie's talked about not doing that again, and he learned from that. And again, that was 4 years ago now, but hopefully he has. That was a mistake. I do wonder if Jordan Malott had never panned out. I wonder what Dillard would have given this team. I will never know, but
Yeah, he would have been the starter. They wouldn't have had any other options, so he would have been the guy in that battle.
I think he would have been okay, but we'll never know.
Yeah, you're right. Well, maybe we'll get a sense of it with how he performs in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I had O-line at 5 and edge at 4. You had edge at 5. What'd you have at 4?
And O-line at 4. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So did you specify or did you do what I did and cheat?
Well, I put guard/tackle. So,
Okay. So we both cheated.
Yeah.
That's fine. Number 3, who'd you have?
I went corner at number 3.
Interesting. Corner was not on my list at all.
Yeah, I went corner just because of their ages, and because I remember being in total shock when they drafted Lito and Sheldon, when Troy Vincent and Bobby Taylor were both established pros and Pro Bowl guys. In fact, Bradbury and Slay are at the exact same ages now that Bobby Taylor and Troy Vincent were in 2002 when Andy Reid drafted Lito and Sheldon, because corners drop off quickly, and I don't know how long those two at their age are going to be elite players. So, they signed Greedy Williams, who's a guy. They have Zach McPherson, who we don't really know much about, but I do think it's an area of need still.
Yeah, and it's funny because need means different things to different people.
Sure.
Yeah. Is it short-term need? No, it obviously isn't a short-term need because they have a trio of guys who are really good. But you never know when the long-term need becomes a short-term need. One of those guys goes down. We don't know what they have in McPherson or Greedy Williams, and you're right, they're older. So, and it's a pretty good cornerback class.
And also Avante, who I think we both really liked. I mean, you can't ignore his injuries and the notion that he might play 8 games next year. So if I don't know if you can draft a guy who's got some ability to play in the slot and also get reps outside, that would be ideal. There's not a lot of guys who can do that at a high level, and you're talking about a high pick. But just when I look at the position in general, there is concern there.
Yeah, that's fair. I didn't have cornerback on my top 5. I understand why you did. My third was linebacker. And that's not to say they're going to suddenly start drafting linebackers in the first round, but right now they don't have a lot there. I mean, it's Nakobe Dean, who we've never seen play in the NFL, really. Nicholas Morrow, who we've seen him play, and it hasn't been great. He's been like an okay player who started every game last year for the Bears and was, not good enough for them to keep him. And they went out and signed 2 linebackers to big deals. And after that, I mean, Davion Taylor, you still hoping he turns out. Sean Bradley, a late round pick who's been like a good special teamer. Christian Ellis, probably a limited player overall. I think there's a lot of work to do at linebacker. Now, I'm not convinced they're going to do that work. If there's one position they're going to kind of punt on, it's going to be that position, but they could use some help there.
Yeah, no question about it. I had linebacker pretty high too, at number 1, and I'll give that away just because we're talking about it. And I'm with you. I know it's never been a priority, other than maybe giving Bradham a big second contract, and he drafted Kendricks, but that's 11 years ago now. And that was still Andy was kind of Howie was a GM, but Andy was still pretty much drafting players. It was a long time ago. So, yeah, it's need is a funny word. It's like they're not going to draft a linebacker in the first round, but I still think it's a big position to need because, we saw how good TJ Edwards was last year and what a difference he made on that defense. And they either had no desire to keep him or he had no desire to stay because that thing was done 15 minutes after we sat down in the office for the start of free agency. It was like, all right, it's starting now. TJ's a Bear. They're going to miss him, and the cupboard is bare. You can throw out these names like Christian Ellis. He had a couple of good reps on special teams. And he's a big physical guy, and Davion was a third-round pick. But to think that you could count on those guys, Nicholas Morrow's just a guy. Nicholas Morrow's growing trees. He's just a guy. And you're right. We don't know about Nakobe. We're all kind of marking him down. He's going to be this, what he was at Georgia. And I think he's got a lot going for him, but it's a different level. So he's still a big unknown for me. He's one of the more intriguing guys, I think, going into the season because I don't really know what to expect from him.
Yeah, he's at the top of the list of guys to watch in training camp, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I had linebacker 3. What did you have 3? Do we know that yet? Corner, that's right. So let's go to 2. You have linebacker 1. What do you have at 2?
I have D tackle at 2.
Interesting. Okay, I have safety at 2.
Yeah, I actually put D backs at 3 to incorporate. I cheated like you. I tried to.
Well, at least
safety. I just put secondary because it's all kind of it's all one group.
Well, I'll accept the cheating on offensive line because those guys really will play other positions, but at corner and safety, it's less likely.
Well, you do have guys who play both. There is overlap. I was just trying to get as many positions as I could in there.
I get that. Not as much as offensive line, but sure, yeah. I separated them. I had safety at 2. So you agree with me that safety is still a need.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's Terrell Edmonds and Reed Blankenship. Your top 2 backups are Kayvon Wallace and Andre Sacheret. I mean, and Justin Evans. Who might not make the team.
Right. None of these guys might not make the team, or all of these guys might not make the team. But yeah, and we saw a little bit of Reed, and I feel pretty good about him. But who knows? And we talked about this maybe last week. That jump from impressive part-time guy to, all right, the job is yours now. That's a big jump. And it's a different deal when you're filling in for a few weeks and when you're the guy, and Reed's got to prove he can be that. I think he will. But it's a big jump. And, other than that, I don't know. I don't know what they'll end up with. It's a position where the Eagles have never taken a first-round pick, which is crazy. Haven't taken one in the second round or third round since Jaquan Jarrett. After that one, they might never take one again, but especially at a Temple. But it's definitely – and, the thing is, I think free agency didn't really do much to change any of these needs because these are all guys on one-year deals. So
that aren't even guaranteed to be here.
Yeah, they're not guaranteed to even be on the team, much less be on the team beyond 2023. So when you're looking at – when I think of needs, I think of 2024, 2025. Needs are what do you want to build around here? And none of these guys are guaranteed to be here beyond this year, and some won't be here this year. So I don't really see that anything changing as far as the long-term needs of the team since free agency started, because maybe they'll sign one of these guys to a long-term deal. It's possible, like Bradbury, did this year, 1-year deal and signed a 3-year deal, but no guarantee of that happening. So, you end up with a lot of pretty significant needs despite all the signings.
Yeah, and in a way it's good too because it doesn't limit you in the draft.
Sure. Yeah.
Not good, but it's another. I don't want to say it's good because ideally you would have signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson, had your safety locked up long term, and they didn't do that. They for whatever reason. So, um, I it's not a great year to need a safety in this draft either. It's not the strongest class. Doesn't mean you won't get one. Heck, we've seen there be really strong classes at a position, and the Eagles not get a good player. So it doesn't completely eliminate the possibility of getting one, but makes it a little tougher. The pool's not as big.
Yeah. And I still think, I think post draft before the season is almost just as likely for a safety, just somebody who gets cut somewhere, so, an Anthony Harris type of guy.
Trade.
Maybe it could be Anthony Harris. You trade for a guy, somebody they like on a practice squad. I mean, those are, those are low percentage type moves. The odds that and how he's done that, he's found guys, he's found functional players that way.
Found CJ last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't cost much.
Yeah, so it's something to keep an eye on. What do you think about Brian Branch as a potential first round pick? Obviously, it wouldn't be at 10. It would be with their second first round pick. Would that intrigue you, especially because he does play nickel too? He's kind of a nickel safety hybrid, and you kind of already have that in Avante. But if you had two of those guys, you have some fun pieces to move around.
Yeah, and certainly Avante's durability issues wouldn't have to be considered there. But yeah, he's an intriguing guy, and you kind of say, well, they're not going to take him because they don't take safeties, but I mean, he does a lot of things well, and he's kind of a fun player. I'd have no problem with it.
And I think the one thing when we talk about the draft and we just say first round pick, especially this year, the difference between number 10 and number 30 in terms of value is very different. just very, very different. And we can't forget that because, I don't think they would take a safety at 10. At 30, I think it's about same with running back, right? A position they don't value as much. Taking a running back at 30, to me, obviously it's still a first round pick, but it's much different than taking one at 10.
Yeah, I think you kind of throw those rules out when you're picking at 30. I mean, you're just a couple spots from the second round. So it's not like all of a sudden you can take a running back at 33, but not at 30. That's silly. I think there's a whole different set of rules at 10 than there are at 30, no doubt.
Okay, so you're number 2, my number 1 defensive tackle. And this is a little bit weighed for me because I know they value the position, but I think it lines up on both fronts because it's a need. Right now, they're okay. They have Fletcher Cox, Milton Williams, and then Jordan Davis. So that starting 3 is pretty good. But after that, I mean, there's not much there. You have Kentavious Street, Marvin Wilson, Marlon Tuipulotu, Noah Ellis. I mean, it drops off pretty quick. So if they were to draft one early, he's playing a ton in 2023.
Yeah, and I think Kentavious Street, I would put him ahead of Tuipulotu and Marvin. I mean, I think he's played in the league, and he's maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I don't think he's very good, but at least he's got more experience than. Although, I mean, Tuipulotu was playing a lot. He was playing 25 snaps, 30 snaps before he got hurt. Not at a very high level.
I haven't given up on him yet.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So but yeah, either way, it's still. And again, when you talk about, I mean, Fletch, again, it's kind of like BG or maybe not Kelsey as much because I don't think Kelsey will ever regress. I think he just keeps getting better. But, you re-sign these older guys and you just don't know at what point they're not going to be the same. Then it could happen to Fletch any day or BG. It's just the way pro sports is, guys. At some point, just start regressing. And Fletcher was able to turn the clock back last year, but again, like BG. I mean, BG might have 3 sacks this year. Wouldn't, when you're 36, 35, it's probably a pretty good year. Fletcher could easily not be the same player he was this past year. So when I'm thinking about needs, I mean, the fact that BG and Fletcher here has no bearing on it for me.
Yeah, and it can't really, because you're not drafting a player for 2023. You're drafting a player, especially that high, to be the guy for a long time. And this is a nice little segue for us here, because we wanted to talk about Jalen Carter anyway. The best defensive tackle in this draft class. I don't think that's in question at all. I mean, he might be the best player in this draft. Obviously, it's not a move made just with football in mind. He's going through some off the field stuff, some legal trouble. There are questions about his maturity stemming from that. So let's talk about Jalen Carter a little bit. First things first, what do you think they're doing behind the scenes to really figure out if they want this guy in their building?
Yeah, and I'm sure they're talking to his. Obviously, you start with Nakobe and Jordan Davis, but his coaches, his position coaches, his high school coaches, family members, former teammates, trainers. Dom DeSandro is really good at this stuff. He's the big guy you always see, walking next to Nick or whoever coming off the field. Usually Nick. But he's like a vice president. He's a pretty high executive, and the Eagles really, really trust him. He has a real way of getting information on players. I think he actually started out as Butch Buchanico's assistant, I believe, security, and just kind of worked his way up. And he's the guy that does a lot of the legwork on these guys. Does interviews. Dom, go find out everything you can about Jalen Carter, and he will. And I think that's where it starts. I think you have to kind of figure out what his pro day meant, and whether there's any additional concern because of that, or whether that was just a product of he was dealing with legal stuff at the time and he just didn't have a chance to prepare physically for it. Yeah, you have to figure that out. There's a lot there. But then you look at the film, and you're like, oh, my God, do we really want to not draft this guy because, what he was going through at his pro day? You get the feeling that when this guy is wrecking house in a year or two in the NFL, nobody's going to be like, oh, but what about his pro day? You get into an NFL camp, you have trainers and nutritionists and all this stuff, and they'll get you in shape. And it's kind of like Jordan Davis. He was in better shape this year than he was in college. There's nothing against Georgia's sports medicine, but just in the NFL, you have more resources. You don't have classes. I don't know how many classes they actually have at Georgia, but I'm not sure how many they're going to. But you're a professional, and there's a lot at stake, and you got bonuses. You might have playing time bonuses, and all of a sudden, everything changes. So they've got to look.
You better not let Nakobe hear you say that.
Yeah, Nakobe went. I don't think he missed a class. No doubt about it. He was like honor student, but you got to find out everything you can about the guy. He's such a good player, and the film doesn't lie. The other stuff to me is like if you're comfortable with him, if you're like, all right, he's not a bad person. He's a guy that made some mistakes. I think Howie talked about this on his interview with Kelsey, just like, it was like, and he was like, look at me at Florida when I was that age. Like, I'm sure he was like, going to raves and going wild. And, I mean, what was a wild night for Howie Roseman at Florida,
He emailed all 32 GMs twice.
I was going to say he might have a second Miller Lite, at the chess club meeting or something. But they're kids, and you just have to keep everything in perspective and figure out who he really is. And it's not an easy thing to do, but man, he's such a talent. I would have to be, if I felt good about who he was as a person and where he was physically, man, I would have no hesitation taking him at 10 if he's there,
Yeah.
which I don't think he will be.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I think it goes beyond being willing to take him at 10. I think if you're willing to take him at 10, you realize because I don't think there are as many people questioning the player, right? Maybe you're questioning his maturity and how it'll translate as a player because you're worried about him putting the work in or whatever it is. But if you've cleared him enough to say we want him at 10, and if that's what the Eagles do, and I don't know that's what they're going to do, but if they do that and they say we will take this guy if he gets to us at number 10, the next part of that is, well, if you take him at 10, you realize how good of a player he is. Would you move up to draft him higher? He's one of the players in this draft I would absolutely trade up for from the 10th pick. It's him, Will Anderson, and Tyree Wilson are the three I would trade up for. And I don't know what you'd have to give up, but the Eagles have shown that they'll do that. You know, they've shown it with the last 2 years, Jordan Davis, Devontae Smith. They showed it with Andre Dillard. A bunch of times they'll move up and draft a player, and he's obviously, to me, that caliber.
Yeah, I totally agree. And our huddle producer, Mike Mulhorn, made a really interesting point. I think you might have made the same point. I'll give him the credit though. Just about, there's a sense that they need a really high volume of picks and a high volume of players, and to an extent, I think they do, just because they have so many guys on 1 year deals, and they do have to think about that. But they have a really good roster even without that. They have a lot of really good players under contract beyond this year, a lot, and there's not as many holes. So when you think, well, they got to get a bunch of picks, that might not necessarily be the case. And I think
They have
that's
12 next year.
Yeah, they have a ton next year. So
Well, they will have 12.
Yeah, they will. So yeah, I think it's a fair point, and if you kind of take that philosophy, then with a chance to get a player like that, yeah, you would definitely consider trading up. I really wonder what other teams think of him. And, there's this thing in the draft, and we still see it, where no matter how much research teams do, guys just start slipping because people don't want to be the one that takes the guy that they're not sure about.
Yeah. And then you have GMs going, well, what do I not know about this player? Why is he slipping? At least with this one, there's enough time to do your homework on Jalen Carter. And if you're a team that is kind of bending to what the rest of the league is doing, you're probably a bad GM anyway.
Yeah.
Like you have to just feel like you know what you're talking about with this kid, whether it's good or bad. You have to just stick by what you've come up with. When it's this far in advance, you have the time to dig. Whereas, like, I think that the Laramie Tunsil gas mask thing, like that happened, and it was like no one knew that was coming, and it was a shock, and teams didn't know how to deal with it in the moment. This isn't like that. I mean, we found out at the combine
Right.
About the legal issues. So plenty of time to do your homework and really figure out a plan.
I also think, Howie, that's one of the things about being GM for life. You don't have to make safe picks because you're not worried about your job. You can, and he also talked in that Kelsey interview about, as a guy's dropping, being true to your board and what and I know he talked about with Jordan Davis, like, everyone's like, this guy can't, he's going to keep dropping because he can't play on third down. He's like, why? Yeah, you have to go into it knowing that you know more than everyone else, and trusting your evaluations.
Yeah, and sometimes it's gonna bite you, but you have to just go with what you've worked on and not be susceptible to the groupthink at times. So
yeah,
but Jalen Carter, to me, I'd run it up at 10, and I'd trade up to get him, and that's obviously assuming he checks out from a personal standpoint. And I can't answer that. I'm not doing that homework on Jalen Carter. I'm not going to
Yeah.
invest the time that the Eagles need to figure that out. But if he checks out in those areas, the player's a stud. Catch all the sports action and more at Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Whether it's the money line or the pass line, there's something for everyone in a great sports book. Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Philly loves a winner. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Roob, 7th round. We're going to start there, looking back at Howie Roseman's tenure as a general manager. So this goes from 2010 through now, but taking away that 2015 class that he was not around for. Well, he was around, but not involved.
Been around for everything. And I apologize to the person that didn't like me clicking on my keyboard during the pod. I just had to change screens.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
What do you want to do first? Best or worst?
Let's do worst.
Okay, let's do worst. And this is tough because it's like in the the first round it's easier to come up with the worst 5. In the 7th round, it's like all these guys are really close. I don't know how you differentiate them. We'll try. So we'll go from worst to like, how do you want to, I don't know how to even explain this.
Well, I don't really know what you're trying to explain. Are we doing multiple? We're doing like worst 3 or best 3?
Oh, I said 5, but we don't have to
Okay.
do it like that.
Well, I mean, for worst, I just went with the guys that never played in the league, which was Joe Kruger, Alex McAllister, and then Greg Lloyd and Jeff Owens played in one and 2 games. So that's how I did it.
Okay. I had David King at 5.
David King. But, I wanted to put Bryce Brown on there somewhere because, I mean, he obviously had 2 incredible games, but he was the most frustrating because he had so much ability.
That's an interesting way to look at it. He ruins all these stats that you like because he had these amazing games. And you're right, he was really talented. Straight line runner, ran really tall. That was the one thing I didn't like about him.
Yeah, and he never tried to improve on that or fix that. And he always tried to kick everything outside, and he just couldn't do it. I think those 2 games he had, he kind of took some people by surprise. And but man, he was a powerful runner, and I think if he had just taken some coaching better, he might have had a nice career. I mean, he ended up playing like 5 or 6 years, but he just so much ability and never did anything with it. So, but I remember Alex McAllister's a guy. I mean, he was I remember him in training camp. He was it's like, wow, you got the guys from Florida. Maybe they stole one here.
I thought so. Like he kind of looked the part a little bit. He was a lanky edge rusher. He knew he needed to fill out a little bit. Never really happened. And he dropped to the 7th because there was some thought that there was like immaturity or he got kind of kicked off the Florida team. He said he didn't, but there was something there where you thought, okay, maybe he's more talented than where the Eagles took him. I think like 246 or something like that. But yeah, it wasn't there.
240. The other one that was disappointing was Greg Lloyd, just because of who his dad was. When your dad's a 5-time Pro Bowler and 3-time All-Pro, you expect a guy to at least make it through the first 2 weeks of training camp.
I always hear that, like he comes from a football family. Do you buy into? I think there is like some validity to that. Like they know what it takes to be in the league. They've been around it their whole lives. Some of that can help. If you don't have the talent, it doesn't matter. But I think it can help a little bit.
It seems like every cornerback that comes out now is like the son of a former NFL player. There's so many of them.
Yeah. And I think it goes beyond genetics too. Like that's a part of it.
Oh yeah. I think it comes in. Patrick Mahomes has talked about this a lot. I mean, his dad obviously didn't play football, but he played baseball for a long time. Just being around the game, being around professionals at a young age and seeing how they go about their business, how they do things, how seriously they take stretching and all that stuff. I think it gives you a real insider kind of sense of, and I think Asante Samuel Jr. has talked about this, not that you can learn about being a pro from his dad, but pro player. But just being around that atmosphere as a young kid, Even hear Jalen talk about it. He, because I guess his mom worked for the Texans, I believe. Is that right?
Uncle.
Yeah, uncle. Yeah. Um, so you kind of you're around the game, you're around professionals, and you get a a picture of what it's like to be a pro that most people don't get. I think that's a big part of it. But genetics too, certainly
That doesn't hurt. Yeah.
doesn't hurt.
Want to do the top five?
Yeah.
Or do you have five ready to go?
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't know, like, what are we doing with, like, Jordan Poyer?
That's a tricky one. So I put Poyer at 3. But
Yeah, I would. You put him at 3. I mean, I would put Poyer 1. Um, probably Mulata 2. Then you have Kurt Coleman and Jalen Mills.
yeah, but you can't put Poyer above those guys because, like, you can't say he was a great draft pick here.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm just as a pick. I say that's I mean, he's had the best career of any of these guys. If it's as for here, you put Mulata first, Jalen Mills second.
Yeah, but this is like a philosophical thing because a great pick, we're talking about within the realm of the Eagles. Like, they picked him and he didn't really play here.
Okay, that's
So I went Mailata, Mills, Poyer, Bo Allen, Kurt Coleman.
yeah. I would do the same thing. I would probably put Kurt Coleman ahead of Bo Allen. Kurt Coleman is a pretty good player here.
His best year came after this. Bo Allen, I figured, was a really good contributor and a contributor on the Super Bowl team.
Yeah, that's true. Jamar Chaney's a guy that started a few years, but I can't put him on any list. Bo Allen was a better player at what he did than Jamar Chaney.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're if as long as we're defining our terms, I'm fine that way.
Yeah, and it makes Jordan Poyer really tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, I could argue Bo Allen above Jordan Poyer.
I believe Kurt Coleman and Jordan Poyer actually have the most interceptions among 7th round draft picks in the last 20 years, which is interesting because they were Eagles 7th round picks just a few years apart, and both played for the Bills at some point.
That's true. Do you agree with Mailata over Jalen Mills at this point?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm a bigger Jalen Mills fan than a lot of people. I think he was really, really good in 17. Really good red zone player where his speed didn't really hamper him. I mean, he was never the fastest guy, and he would get beat on double moves. But in the end zone, and we certainly saw at the end of the NFC Championship game with Julio, he was just a playmaker in the end zone. He always knocked balls down in the end zone. He was smart. He was tough. He played the run. He was physical. He was a real leader. I thought he was a really good player. And but Mulata, I mean, he's in a different world, and I would think he's just gonna keep getting better. So I'd put him ahead of Jalen.
So kind of funny, the same exact pick, 233, same as Casey Toohill as well.
233.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Casey Toohill is the player they lost. They wanted to keep him back in 2020, and they tried to sneak him to their practice squad in Washington, snagged him.
Yeah, and that's what happened with Poyer as well. Actually, the Browns signed him when Eagles were trying to sneak him onto the practice squad to keep. Gosh, I can't remember who they wanted to keep. It was somebody who they shouldn't have tried to keep. But Casey Toohill's become a contributor in Washington, and he's not a star. I'm just looking up his snap counts. He played 350 snaps each of the last 2 years, so he's become a contributor down there. So good for him.
Started 6 games in 21.
He did. Yeah. He played the same number of snaps last year without a start, which is weird. But yeah, he's anytime you can get drafted in the 7th round and become a vested veteran and get your pension and get 4 years, and I guess it's 3 years now with the new CBA. Is that right for pension? You've done a hell of a job as a 7th round pick, getting a few years in the league. You made some money. you beat all the odds. And look, a lot of these guys. I mean, Joe Walker had a long career, right? Joe Walker played like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, relatively long.
Yeah. I'm just thinking who else on this list. Joe Walker.
I mean, Patrick Johnson's lasted 2 years now.
Yeah. Joe Walker played in 66 games, played 5 years. I think he was actually on a roster last year and was hurt. Stanley Havili played 2 years. I mean, all these guys, and they've taken 17 guys. I guess Brian Mahalik doesn't count. He was a chip
15,
guy.
Yeah.
In 15. But out of the 16 guys Howie's drafted in the 17th round, 8 of them started 10 games or more in their career, which is, most seventh round picks don't do that. So, and Poyer's the only Pro Bowler in the bunch
so far.
Still hope for Joe Walker. It would, since we're on the topic, I'd like to see Jordan Mailata make that jump. It's tough at left tackle. Like to see him.
Yeah, had a bit of a down year last year. I think the injury to his shoulder certainly played a role in that. But you wonder, because he kept improving at like such a high rate over the first couple of seasons. You knew that like he wasn't going to continue to improve at that rate, but I still don't know what his ceiling is, and I don't think they do either.
Yeah, it's a great question. I know he was disappointed. I mean, he just turned 26 last week, so he's a young guy. I know he was disappointed in last year, although I thought he played better at the end of the year in the playoffs. But I'd like to see him take that next step. Yeah, I'm sure he would too.
Eagles would, yeah. They already paid him, so if he could take that step. But even if he ends up being an average tackle for 8 years, I mean, he'll be by far the best 7th round pick under Howie, at least.
I think he's an above average left tackle. I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, but he's definitely got the tools to be a Pro Bowl player.
He had the tools to be the best left tackle in the league.
He probably does.
I mean, if we're talking tools, and he has the coach to bring it out of him, so no reason to think he can't be.
And he's got a right tackle to learn from every day, practice, every game, every meeting.
Yeah. You got anything else today?
You know what? I did want to mention that you guys know what a big soccer fan I am. The Eagles and the Premier League announced this. This is really cool, actually. You're kind of a soccer guy, right? A little bit.
I'll dabble.
You went to that game in Atlanta?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'll go. I actually haven't been to a Union game, and I feel like kind of disappointed in myself that I haven't been to one. But I'll go to a Union game soon. Yeah,
it's a beautiful stadium from what I've seen. I haven't been down there. But, during the shutdown, during 2020, there was no sports on. And I was going crazy. And the Premier League was the first thing to start up in empty stadiums, but they were playing games like, I think that summer of 2020 or that fall. And it was the first sports that was on TV. So I started watching it and I kind of really got into it. So they're playing 9 games in the U.S. in not Premier League games, but Premier League teams are playing a little tournament in Atlanta, in Philly, in North Jersey, and Harrison at that stadium they have up there, in Landover. And 3 of the games are actually at the Link, which is really cool. So it's July 22nd and 23rd. So it's just before training camp will start. Might even start that weekend or that week. So Chelsea versus Brighton on the 22nd, and then Fulham versus Brentford on the 23rd, and later doubleheader. I assume that's separate admission, but I don't know. I have to find that out. Newcastle United and Aston Villa play in the next match on the 23rd. So I think it's really cool. And there have been actually the first thing that was ever at the Link was a friendly. I forget. It was like one of the Premier League teams played, maybe the U.S. national team back in 2003 before the Eagles even played there. But it's pretty cool. And then the World Cup is going to be here and 15 other cities in the U.S. in 2026. So I'm sure the games are going to sell out. I'm sure it's going to be a wild atmosphere. I'm going to try to get over there and catch some, because you don't have a lot of. It's the first time they've ever played this tournament in the U.S. It's been in Asia. Other years they play every other year. So I think it's pretty cool. And yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye Podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. That's it. We'll talk to you soon. For Reuben, I'm Dave. This has been Eagle Eye.